We are 2 messages away from completion of our series, Making the Case for Israel as the Jewish people's homeland. Last week, I promised you that we would see the establishment of the State of Israel, and indeed, just this past week, Israel celebrated its Independence Day. So this is a very appropriate time for us to focus in on 1947 and 1948. Let's review very quickly some legal cases. International law. Lord Balfour of England had written the Zionist Congress or actually a representative of the Zionist Congress, that Britain was ready to advocate for the establishment of a Jewish homeland. And indeed, when World War I was over and Turkey, the Ottoman Empire, was dismantled, literally Turkey was gobbled up piece by piece. See what I did there? Listen, they can't all be gold, all right? These are the jokes. Some will land, some won't. All right, stay with me. I'll be here all week. All right, but the British mandate was established, and Britain was the patron, if you will, in control of the region of Palestine until such time as the Jewish people would be able to establish a homeland. You see, the original borders of Palestine were large, generous. They include the region along the Mediterranean Sea and going all the way out east toward Syria, Iraq, which, by the way, are both creations of England and France, and Arabia, Saudi Arabia, of course, not yet being established when the mandate for Palestine was laid out in April of 1920. But nonetheless, we also had the resolution of our Congress that America favors the establishment of Palestine and a national home for the Jewish people, et cetera, et cetera. That was approved by our Congress in September 21st, 1922. Somebody should get the message to Congresswoman Tlaib and her pals in the squad. We see the League of Nations wraps things up very nicely. Treaty of Versailles, Palestine was low on the list. They wrapped things up in the Middle East in April of 1919, San Remo, and in August of 1920, which actually formalizes the gobbling up of Turkey, of the Ottoman Empire, divisioning it into the control of various Western powers. And of course, we have, as we'd mentioned, the League of Nations mandate for Palestine. And I pointed out last week, and I want to reiterate it because it's so important, that in this League of Nations mandate for Palestine from 1922, this document, it actually includes this sentence: whereas recognition has thereby been given to the historical connection of the Jewish people with Palestine, and to the grounds for reconstituting their national home in that country. Nobody's handing the Jewish people a consolation prize for the Holocaust to assuage world guilt for what happened to the poor Jews. That's not why the Jewish people are in Israel. We see here, international document, international law, this statement recognizing that the Jewish people have a historical connection to this particular land, which we spent months establishing in our biblical, the first section, biblical reasons. And that's therefore the grounds for reconstituting their national home in that country, as opposed to Uganda or Argentina or any other country in the world, or Brooklyn, New York, for that matter. We saw that England, under political pressure, led by Winston Churchill as Foreign Secretary, made the determination to divide Palestine into a Jewish section. 20% along the coast would go to the Jewish people as their homeland, and 80% or 78%, whatever it may be, would go to the Arabs to become the nation of Transjordan. You see it right there. And that's what was determined. That's the way the cookie crumbles. The Jewish people said, okay, as long as we have something, we'll take something is better than nothing. 20% of something is better than nothing of 100%. We saw the Peel Commission in 1937 try to figure out how the final mandate, the final national borders would shake out. Britain decided at that point that although 80% of the land of Palestine, the Mandate of Palestine, had been designated to the Arab population of Palestine, that still, because there were Jews and Arabs living together inharmoniously in the remainder of Palestine, that they would thereby divide that land again. They'd already divided 80-20. Now take the remaining 20 and give the Jews 10% and the Arabs 10% of that. So that ultimately the Arabs, all told, would receive 90%. Of course, you can't call those Arabs living in Transjordan Palestinians anymore, can you? Because now the nation is called Transjordan. Therefore, they're Jordanians. But the population hasn't changed. Political exigencies have changed. So you now have Palestine divided up between Palestinian Arabs and Palestinian Jews, and a diplomat named Peel decided to see if he could propose how to divide the area. You see in the yellow, what was proposed is the Arab state, the Jewish state, up on the top, a piece of the coastline and Galilee, and the Golan Heights as well, and Jerusalem as an international area. The Jewish people, they really didn't like it because it really pressed them into just one area. And even in that area, there was still a lot of Arab population. And so many voices said, reject this, but ultimately they did not reject it. The Arab population can always be relied on to reject the proposals of dividing the land. See, that's a two-state solution right there. Right? Two-state solution was proposed, as we saw, 1916, Sykes-Picot. Rejected. Two-state solution proposed here, 1937. Of course, you already have two states, Transjordan and Palestine, right? But who's paying attention, right? They're counting on the world not paying attention to history. Don't know much about history, said most politicians and most delegates to the United Nations and most other people with microphones, right? Whose opinions are broadcast. But you know about history, right? Because you've sat through this interminably long series. All right. Nonetheless, the Arabs turned this down. Said, nope, we're not taking half a loaf. We want the whole loaf from the river to the sea. You see, right? This is where this slogan begins, from the river to the sea. We will not divide. up our land and give any of it to Jewish people. It's unthinkable for any Arabs anywhere. And take that back. It's actually more ideology and religion. It's unthinkable for any Muslims anywhere to sit under the subjugation, quote unquote, of a Jewish nation, the humiliation of being ruled and being part of a Jewish state. And since it was previously controlled by Muslims, by Muslim rulers, Islam, it is a humiliation for any land that was once controlled by Islam to be controlled by anyone else. It reflects, you see, poorly on Islam, and they lose face. In an honor, shame, culture, society, ideology, this is a losing proposition for the Arabs. They say no. I introduced you last week to the Mufti of Israel, who made delightful bedfellows with the Fuhrer in plotting together to exterminate all Jews everywhere. Adolf, baby, you take the high road. You take all of the northern hemisphere. Right? You take Europe and Russia. And I, the Mufti, king of all Muslims, right, head of all, I'll take care of wiping and exterminating the Jews in the Middle East, right? And together, like peanut butter and jelly, we're going to accomplish our goal. Well, after World War II is won by the Allies, Adolf and his allies, the Axis, are defeated. The Mufti runs off to Egypt, and I'm going to say never heard from again. He is heard from again, but he doesn't have the power that he once had. Didn't have the power that he once had. Well, in 1946, post-World War II, United Nations absorbed the League of Nations. The treaties and agreements were grandfathered under, right? So again, the whole idea of the Jewish people having a homeland had already been determined. The borders hadn't been determined, but it had already been determined. Well, they had been, but they reneged, nonetheless, okay? But there were still some fungible areas. But now it's got to whole be re-adjudicated and re-decided by the United Nations, as if nothing that the League of Nations actually did still counts. And so the United Nations, in November 1947, things are getting pretty hot for the British in Palestine. The Arabs hate the Jews. The Jews can't stand the persecution of the Arabs, and both Arabs and Jews hate the British. Right? It's a perfect circle of disgust. And so Britain's like, okay, we're about ready to give up our partition, so our mandate rather, so how about we dump this on the newly formed United Nations, and let's finalize a partition plan so Britain can get out, okay? So indeed the sun can finally set on the British Empire in the Middle East. And so the UN comes up with a partition plan. This is what it looks like. We looked at this last time. We'll look at it again because this is something for us to understand. The United Nations drew up a plan that had for the Arabs an area on the coast, see Gaza, and the north of the Gaza Strip, all the way down to Rafah, down on the south where they are today, where Gaza is today, and then going down border, all along the border, halfway down toward the Red Sea along Egypt, then as well as what we would now consider to be roughly the West Bank, the western bank of the River Jordan, that area in the center, that is roughly the West Bank. You see that Jerusalem is still considered to be an internationally administered area, not controlled by Jews, not controlled by Arabs. We know what happens when Muslims get control of Jewish holy sites and Jewish places of worship. We'll talk about that once we establish Israel as a nation and see what happens when Jordan takes over Jerusalem and the West Bank. And of course, the nice little piece up there in the north, in Galilee. Israel, to get the access to the Sea of Galilee, you see they're surrounding the Sea of Galilee, and along the coast there, Tel Aviv, Jaffa, that's some lovely area, Haifa, and then going down into the desert, into the Negev. The Jewish people said, we're as close as we've ever been to having an official homeland once again. We are going to take it. Sold. The Arabs rejected. No half a loaf or 90% of the loaf. Nope. The whole thing or nothing. Nonetheless, the United Nations, they voted and they approved this partition. So, until such time as Britain pulls away, the mandate ends, the British mandate ends. This is going to de facto define the borders of the new Jewish homeland. All that green area is going to be the Jewish homeland. So the Arabs said, no, if you pull out Britain, if Israel, if you announce yourself as be a state, we are going to attack you. Not only we're going to attack you, but all the neighborhood is going to attack you. 6 nations. You live in a very tough neighborhood. Don't do it. But in May of 1948, May 14th, Israel did indeed do it. Britain pulled out. David Ben-Gurion, the new prime minister, announced that Israel would be a state. It had to be approved. Their statehood had to be approved by a majority of the United Nations nations. Astonishingly, Russia, Soviet Union, voted yes. For this very short period of time, you see, the Soviet Union had looked on Israel and the kibbutz movement that was going on there, this collective farms, and say, okay, well, there's a bunch of socialists there, and if we play our cards right, Israel can be within the influential sphere of the Soviet Union. So they quickly changed their minds thereafter, but nonetheless, Stalin voted yes. And over here, in America, Secretary of State said, don't do it, Harry. Don't do it. It's the Secretary of State's, it was Marshall. So don't do it. It's not in our best interest as a nation to approve that Jewish state. Don't do it. But old Harry Truman, he had an old business partner who was Jewish, who filled his ear with all the reasons why. And Harry Truman was a Bible believer. And Harry Truman, therefore America, said yes. And under the most unlikely circumstances, that lightning is striking in a very odd and unique way, almost as if it's being coordinated, orchestrated from unseen powers above. And Israel is recognized as a state. Let me show you that video clip.
זוהי זכותו הטבעית של העם היהודי להיות ככל עם ועם עומד בזכות עצמו במדינתו הריבונית אשר תפתח לרווחה את שערי המולדת לכל יהודי ותעניק לעם היהודי מעמד של אומה שוות זכויות בתוך העמים. לפיכך נתכנסנו אנו חברי מועצת העם נציגי היישוב העברי והתנועה הציונית ביום סיום המנדט הבריטי על ארץ ישראל. תוקף זכותנו הטבעית וההיסטורית ועל יסוד החלטת עצרת האומות המאוחדות אנו מכריזים בזאת על הקמת מדינה יהודית בארץ ישראל, היא מדינת ישראל. מתוך ביטחון בצור ישראל, הננו חותמים בסתימת ידינו לעדות על הכרזה זו.
All right. She's going to sing Hatikva, and it's going to be beautiful, but take my word for it. When the 6 surrounding nations attack the new state of Israel, same day. When the fighting is done, this is 6-day war, 1948. The fighting, War of Independence, rather. When the fighting is done, armistice lines are drawn, and you can see what they are. You see that Israel has taken contiguous land that if the Arabs living in that area had said, yes, they could have been controlling, but no, that's Israel. And you can see the cities, the Jewish towns and villages in red, the black are the Arab towns and villages. You see, the armistice line was called the Green Line. That green line on the south, for example, where you see Gaza and Rafah, is controlled by Egypt. It is not controlled by Palestinian Arabs. It is annexed by Egypt. It is considered to be part, because Egypt attacked, and that is where the armistice line was drawn. Egypt kept that land for itself. You will see in the center of the country what is called the West Bank. This is why it's given the name, the West Bank, because again, it is not a Palestinian state. It is not Palestinian land. It is conquered by Transjordan. And so it is the West Bank of the nation of Jordan. So instead of Jordan having a nice, neat border on its west that is contiguous with the Jordan River, it actually has a giant peace in Palestine. Controlled by Jordan. It is interesting that when Jordan took the West Bank and Egypt took the Gaza Strip, there were no cries for from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. Right? The Palestinians didn't scream for the Jordanians to get out. The Palestinians living in the Gaza Strip did not scream for Egypt to be out. However, what Jordan did not do, what Egypt did not do, is allow those Palestinian Arabs to become Egyptian or Jordanian citizens. They granted them refugee status. Now, you will notice in this map, as I pointed out, that there are still plenty, you can see them clustered, Arab towns and villages throughout Israel. Why is that? Again, to truncate a long story, but to boil it down to its constituent basic parts, when the 6 Arab nations came to destroy the nascent state of Israel, they communicated with the Arabs living in those villages and say, if you know what's best, flee, run, okay, leave your homes, get out of our way, because we're going to drive those Jews into the sea, and you do not want to get in our way. So many fled toward Jordan. Many fled toward Egypt. Many fled toward Lebanon. But many Arabs did not. Many Arabs decided that they wanted to throw in their lot with the Jewish state. The Jewish state promised them that they could be citizens as well. Remember, the Balfour Declaration made sure to protect the religious and civic rights of people already living there. And so that is why today the population of Israel is comprised of 1.5 million Arab citizens. Not living in the West, not talking about those living in the West Bank, not talking about Gaza, talking about citizens of Israel. So, those are the armistice lines. That's how it lays. But in 1964, prior to the Six-Day War, this would be the 1967 attack by said surrounding nations, the revenge of the Independence Day War. A group forms called the Palestinian Liberation Organization, 1964. What is there to be liberated, you may ask? What kind of charter is necessary? Again, looking at the map, you see you've got Palestinians living under Jordanian rule. I don't have a problem with that. You have Palestinians living under Egyptian. They have no problem with that. And you have Arab citizens in Israel. So what is the purpose of this Palestinian Liberation Organization? What do these Palestinians want to liberate? First of all, I want to remind you that until 1948 and the establishment of the State of Israel, every person in Palestine was called a Palestinian. You were either Palestinian Arab or Palestinian Jew, right? The original name for the Jerusalem Post was the Palestinian Post. Okay, so Palestinian prior to 1964, or really prior to 1948, was used for both Jews and non-Jews. But now you have a movement, a desire by certain factions in the Arab world to create a Palestinian people, to redefine the Palestinian Arabs as the only Palestinians, to rewrite history, erasing the historic continuity of the Jewish people in the land of Israel, or their historic connection to their homeland, and proposing that this whole establishment of Israel was a colonial theft. And if you're not well educated, or if you go to the Ivy League schools, which is a big redundant there, you might buy into their lie. Let's see what the Palestinian National Charter in 1964, this is 3 years prior to the liberation of the West Bank and Gaza. Article 2, I want to point out, Palestine, with its boundaries at the time of the British Mandate, is a regional, indivisible unit. Now, they're actually not talking about Palestine, including Transjordan. They've already although that was the goal. We see later in 1970, a great number of the Palestinian people in Jordan attempted to overthrow the Hashemite king and establish one giant return to the Palestinian mandate, the British mandate of Palestine. But nonetheless, talking about from the river to the sea. Palestine with its boundaries at the time of the British mandate, so from Transjordan to the Mediterranean Sea, from the river to the sea, is a regional, indivisible unit. Understand what's being said there. There's no room for a two-state solution if you're talking about a regional, indivisible unit. You're actually saying, no, compromise is not possible, whole loaf or no loaf. Article 24, this organization does not exercise any regional sovereignty over the West Bank in the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan, or the Gaza Strip, or the Himma area. These are areas that were captured by the neighbors, Egypt, Jordan, etc., in the War of Independence. Its activities will be on the national popular level in the liberational, organizational, political, and financial fields. So, we're not trying to exercise sovereignty over the West Bank or Gaza. We just want all the area that's in the middle, i.e., Israel. That's what we want to liberate, the land from the Jews. 1967, you know what happened, Six-Day War. The nations once again came against Israel. Israel pushed back. This time they were able to push Jordan out of the West Sea. They pushed Jordan back into, Jordanians back into Jordan. They pushed the Egyptians out of Gaza and actually the Sinai Peninsula as well. And so all that yellow land, and you've got the Golan Heights from Syria. You get all that land that is now under Israeli control after the Six-Day War. At some point, with conflict still occurring after the war, still no peace amongst the Arab populations of the West Bank and of Gaza and the Israeli state. Somebody by the name of Alon, was a general, came up with a plan, said, okay, let's annex some area and turn it back to Jordan. We don't want to control these people anymore. We want to return some area to Jordan. You can see that in the green. And then you can see the other areas that are to be retained by Israel. And of course, then the area of Gaza that Gaza Strip, for goodness sake, turn it to Jordania. Let the Jordanians control it. That was rejected by all parties whatsoever. Which brings us to 1988 and the Hamas covenant, and which will take us to where things are today. This is actually a very good place for us to stop. We will pick it up in 1988 within our lifetimes. Well, most of our lifetimes, some of us, some few exclusions. And we'll be able to see the origin of Hamas. What does Hamas want? And remember that when an organization like the PLO, Palestinian Liberation Organization, when the PLO, when Hamas, when they create a charter, they tell you what they're all about. Every group does this, right? To start Sojourner Ministries, I had to submit a charter of sorts, some bylaws and some guidelines as to what Sojourner Ministries. I had to submit it to the Secretary of State of Texas before I was approved. America, in setting out what it is, we have some founding documents, for example, like the Declaration of Independence. Founding document, our Constitution, founding document. It tells us who we are, but more importantly, it tells the world who we are and what we stand for. That's why we can say we the people, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And the world will know what America stands for. That's why they're writing these charters, so that the world will know. But see, number one, the world has to read the charter in order to understand. It has to be shared with them. And if you're not reading it, then you can blather on like the ignoramuses on our campuses today, or like many of our news reporters today, who are excellent at reading teleprompters, not so great at analysis. Because you have to read the primary documents. We're going to look at a few of the articles, and that will inform us on our understanding of who Hamas is, who they said they were in 1988, who they say they are today, and will give us a great perspective to be able to wind up our discussion next week. And next week, especially important, not to be missed, I am going to show you a 9-minute video, and with stopping and starting and analyzing and pointing out hot takes, we're going to look at how an educated journalist handles a conversation with an uneducated journalist, but a journalist who has an agenda, an anti-Semitic, anti-Israel agenda. Many of us may encounter such discussions online or at work or in our families. This will give you a few pointers as to how to deal with people making ignorant points with no basis in fact by countering it with. So do not miss that, because we will analyze what this journalist does, okay, next week, to give you a practical takeaway. We have to take communion.